All right, well, we'll get started. Just very quickly, my name's Ted Tucker, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Foundation for Teaching Economics. And we're actually very excited to bring our guest speaker today to run this workshop on escape rooms. I saw her do this session back in October at the Council for Economic Education's annual conference, and I thought it was really valuable and a great way to teach about economics, teach about the economic way of thinking, and especially in a very creative, interactive way. And as you all know, if you've done FTE programs before, we're very much believers in active learning, experiential learning, doing engaging economics, just to get students excited about the subject. So our speaker today is Amy Krzyzanowski. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. She is a teacher at the Delaware Military Academy. She's been there for, I think, 4 years now, 5 years, but she's also been a teacher for several years at other locations as well. So I thought first, before I turn it over, I would ask Lisa Chang, my colleague, to briefly talk about the rules of the game. This is an FTE program. We're very sort of strict about kind of, establishing the rules of the game for all of our various activities and programs. And then once Lisa's done, we'll have Amy take it over. So Lisa.
Thank you, Ted. So as Ted mentioned, and you would have seen in the email reminder that we sent out to everyone, we do expect active participation in our virtual programs. So attendance is required in full. There will also be a survey link at the end of the program in the chat, and we expect that you would please fill that out as well. We would like to ask that everyone have cameras turned on and microphones on unless otherwise directed by the speaker. Please be sure to follow those rules. Keep an eye on your chat. We may be messaging you privately to turn cameras on. If you're not responding in chat, and keep your cameras off, we will be removing people from the program, just because, again, it does make a huge difference to have everyone participating. We will be doing some breakout rooms, and again, active participation is a must. Thanks so much. And Amy, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me and for taking time out of your day to come and learn a bit about digital escape rooms and how they can be a really excellent tool in your classroom. I absolutely love making these games, playing these games. I will talk people's ear off about these games to anyone who's willing to listen. So again, I do appreciate you being here. And I will say I'm using Nearpod. So there is an interactive component to this session, as Lisa already mentioned. But if you're somebody who doesn't really feel comfortable toggling between two screens, the Zoom screen and the Nearpod screen, just stick with the Zoom screen. Everything that you need, you'll be able to see on the Zoom. And I'll give you a heads up when we're getting to one of those interactive
4
parts.
packets on each square. So erase this and just.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll give you a heads up when the interactive parts are coming if you do want to jump over to the Nearpod. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Nearpod presentation if you want to open that in another tab. But again, it's not required. Or you could go to join.nearpod.com, the URL that's on the screen, and you can enter this code. And this code is always in the top center of the screen. When I click off of this, it'll still be up in the top center where you can actually see it. So, escape rooms. Let me tell you what we're going to cover today. I'm going to go over the basics of what digital escape rooms actually are. I am going to show you the Breakout EDU platform, which is what I use to actually create these games. So you'll get to go through a sample lock just to show you how the website is set up and how your students would actually navigate through one of these games. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to facilitating these games in the classroom, things that I've learned through a lot of trial and error, so that hopefully you can avoid some of the rookie mistakes that I made when I first started making these games and playing them in the classroom. I'm going to show you how the games can be customized and scaffolded so that they cast a wider net. You can use them with a larger student audience and kind of tailor them. You can use the same game, but for different levels of classes and different types of learners with some of these tips and tricks for scaffolding. You're also going to have the chance to go into breakout rooms and play a game that's centered on supply and demand. So you'll experience exactly what your students are going to experience. We'll come back, we'll debrief. You can ask any questions that you might have. And then last but not least, I'm going to share some resources with you. There are a bunch of other games that I've created on other economic topics that you'll have access to, but I'm also going to show you some digital resources in case you're interested in building and designing your own games. So that's what we'll do this evening. And I'll tell you, this meme, I purposely included this because the whole digital escape room thing really came in handy during virtual teaching. I felt like I aged 10 years in a matter of just a few months. It was really stressful. And I felt like these games just mixed things up, worked perfectly in the virtual world, but they've also translated well since we've come back to the classroom. So I'll show you a bit about that just in case we do go back virtual ever, God forbid. They do work really well in this kind of setting. All right, without further ado, I am curious what everyone's background is with escape rooms. If you've ever done physical escape rooms, the digital escape rooms, if you're brand new to this activity, if you're choosing to use the Nearpod, you could hop over to that tab and in the bottom, the text box, if you don't mind sharing with me your experience with digital escape rooms, that would be great. And if you prefer to stick to the Zoom screen, you could just pop it in the chat as well. Okay, brand new, brand new, brand new. Okay. Both. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you are relatively brand new to using digital escape rooms. Oh, I like that, Tanya. You've actually had your students develop escape rooms. These make great projects. I've done that as well. As far as having kids create entire games or just individual locks, it's a great way to review and reinforce what you've taught. Okay, Nearpod with other instructors. Okay, so a few of you have done the physical escape rooms. Okay, so most of you are brand new. All right, well, hopefully you'll be able to get everything that you need to feel confident to take these games and run them in your classroom after this session. And I am all about, if you ever have questions or issues, email me. I love helping people out. So I'll give you my contact information at the end as well. So what an escape room is if you are brand new. A digital escape room is basically an online version of what you would experience in a physical escape room. And in a physical escape room, you're basically locked in a room with a group of friends or family, and you have to scour the room to try to find clues, work through a series of puzzles and locks so that hopefully you can escape the room. And the room typically has some kind of theme or mission that you're trying to accomplish. It's super collaborative, competitive, fun. There's a time crunch. You have to break out under a certain time frame. So with the online escape rooms, it's the same idea, but everything is housed on a website. You're still solving puzzles. There's still a mission and a theme tied to the game. And you still have to break out. You still have to work through a series of locks to break out of the room. It's a really great tool for the classroom because it creates an environment where kids are really, truly collaborating. They are talking to each other, they're working together, they're engaging in a productive struggle, they're tapping into that competitive side, which can really generate a lot of buy-in. And it's a great way to get kids thinking at a higher level and reinforce the econ or personal finance concepts that you've been teaching. So I typically use these activities as a method to review or reinforce the content being taught. I don't use these to actually introduce the content. I know that there are some people who do, but I feel like the game itself is challenging enough instead of adding on, hey, learn this new stuff while you're at it. So I typically do this after I've taught the content. And I use it as an informal formative assessment. I don't grade escape rooms, because the kids are working in groups, it's a little bit tricky to figure out which kid specifically knows what, since they're constantly working alongside others. So I use it as an informal check for understanding, and depending on what locks kids struggle with, gives me an idea of what concepts I might want to go back and review and reinforce before we move on to something else. What an escape room, what a digital escape room is not, is something that I could just hit print on the computer and hand out to kids as a worksheet. It's much more fun and interactive than that. I wanted to show you a sample lock here. This is a one lock game that I created on Breakout EDU. Breakout EDU is a digital platform that you can use to build these games. And they also have what's called a sandbox of other games across all the different content areas of games that others have already created and shared. You do not need an account with Breakout EDU to be able to use these games in your classrooms. The only thing that you need is a game link. That's it. Now, if you wanted to actually be able to edit the game or create your own games on this platform, then yes, you would need a paid account. But otherwise, again, all you need is the link. And every single lock is going to have the same basic structure. So I'm going to preview this for you. There's always some kind of setup or story on the left-hand side, and it typically has clues and hints that are embedded. Sometimes the hints are pretty obvious, sometimes they're not, and kids have to figure that out. The other thing that you have is a clue. It might be a visual, like on this particular lock, it's an airline ticket. Sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's hidden hyperlinks to other websites, and sometimes it's a text clue. So kids have to use the setup and the clue to figure out the combination or enter the combination correctly at the bottom of the screen. And with Breakout EDU, there's going to be all different types of locks. There's going to be color locks, letter locks, number locks, directional locks, shape locks. So they just have to look to see what type of lock it is and how many digits or colors, etc. they'll have to enter. So for this one, it is a 3-color lock. So what I want to do, if you're using the Nearpod in the other tab, when I advance forward to the next slide, it's going to be a link to this one lock game. And you are welcome to try to solve the lock and enter the correct combination. If you want to hang out on the Zoom, you'll be able to see the game as well. When kids get to the game, usually there's a storyline here, and it tells them what the mission actually is. But because this is a sample lock, I didn't put a story. And you can see at the top, let me actually open this up in a different tab so you can see this in full screen. At the top, you've got the progress bar, and you can see that this game consists of only one lock. So I'm going to click on it, or you could hit start game. And once you're on the page, you can actually click expand clue, and you're able to zoom in on the little details of this airline ticket. So I'll give you guys a minute to see if you can figure out what the combination is. And if you think you've got it, pop the answer in the chat. And if you've never had any experience with digital escape rooms, again, this is exactly what your students are going to experience. So I want you to get a feel for it. See if you can figure it out. Yes, Theodore in the chat, that is where she's going, but how can you get that to a color lock? Theodore figured out that she's going to Munich.
Would it be the colors of the German flag?
It is, Tanya, great job. Yes. And how do you know?
I don't know the order though.
So here's the other thing. A lot of times kids assume that Googling something is cheating. In the world of digital escape rooms, Google is fair game. So you could Google the German flag to figure out what it actually looks like. And then how would you know what order to actually enter them in? Anybody figures that out, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. How do you know what order to put the colors of the flag in for the combination? All right, let's see. I've got something in the chat. All right, so I'll tell you here, if you look back at the lock setup, there's a few things that kids would need to notice. First of all, they have to see that it's asking where she's headed, which you guys figured out very quickly. The airport code is for Munich. Again, you could Google MUC if you're not sure what that is. They can Google it. It'll tell them it's in Munich, Germany. And then it says to flag her down, and flag is in all capitals, which Tanya, you correctly identified. It would be the colors of the German flag. But to figure out what order they'd have to go in, it says you'll be stuck here from top to bottom. So they would enter the colors. It is black, yellow. All right, black, red, yellow would be the order of the flag colors from top to bottom. And because this is the one lock game, they get taken to the screen that says, yay, you broke out, you won the game, great, awesome. Now, you can imagine if you've never done any kind of digital escape room, and you can come back to the Zoom. If you were on the breakout game, you can come back to the Zoom. I'm going to head back to the Nearpod screen. But if you're a kid, a high school kid who's never done this kind of game, or middle school, because you can actually tailor some of the games that I've created to work for the middle school level too. I'll show you that in just a bit. This can be really overwhelming. A lot of times kids want you to have the instructions right there, step by step, just tell me what to do. I don't want to have to figure out, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And it can be very overwhelming and frustrating. So if you found yourself frustrated, chances are your kids are probably going to be frustrated too. My suggestion would be to do something like this sample lock with your kids. You'll be provided with the link to this in just a little bit. Do the sample lock with your students so that they understand the type of thinking that's involved, that it's not just straightforward, here's exactly what you should do. They have to actually search for clues and hints and figure out what to do. So it's a very different style of thinking than they're often used to. The other thing that you could do, if you want to skip the sample lock, is if you're playing, say, the supply and demand game that I'm going to show you, you could actually solve the first lock together as a whole group and then set them off on their own for the rest of the game. And I do feel that the more kids engage in this type of activity, the better critical thinkers they're going to be, the better they're going to be able to persevere through tough activities like this, and they're going to build confidence the more that they do it. But that first time they experience it, the frustration level might be a little bit higher than it would be otherwise. So for facilitating the game, a few tips for you. First of all you need, I've already said this, all you need is the URL. So the game that we're going to play today is tinyurl.com/Dr. Scarcity. I always publish the link on our school's learning management system. And I like to do that for a couple reasons. I like to do that for a couple of reasons. When I've in the past written the URL on the board, chances are at least one or more kids is going to forget a backslash, or they're going to accidentally misspell something, or they're going to miss one letter, a simple typo, and they're going to think that the website is broken, and they're going to be very frustrated because they're starting after everybody else. The other reason why I like to publish the link instead of having kids type it in is I can drum up that competitive spirit. So maybe do a countdown before I actually hit publish on Schoology, and they're all racing to click the link and open the game first. It just kind of builds up a little bit of excitement. So that's the first suggestion. The second suggestion is strategically grouping your kids. I highly recommend pairs. I avoid kids working solo at all costs, even if they're more of an intrapersonal learner, and absolutely despise working with a partner. If you let kids work solo, you're losing one of the biggest benefits of digital escape rooms, and that is that collaborative piece. So I highly recommend avoiding kids working alone. And I don't recommend groups larger than 2 if you can help it, because otherwise you do end up with that free rider situation where a couple of kids are hovering over the same screen, working really hard on the game, and the other people or person is just kind of sitting there, not really doing anything, not really getting anything out of the activity. So pairs are really ideal. And if you are back in a virtual setting, again, you're going to experience this in just a little bit, putting kids in breakout rooms is a great way to group them. And my biggest suggestion, this one has helped me the most across all the classes that I've run this activity in. hint cards. Hint cards printed on bright cardstock that you can collect back and use over and over, time and again, are one of the best things you can do. It's a really good way to take the same exact game and make it work for different levels. So the supply and demand game that I'm going to show you today, I've run this in an inclusion classroom. I've run it in a traditional college prep classroom. I've used it in honors. I've used it in advanced placement. And the way that I differentiated was the amount of hint cards that students received. So the classes where I know that this type of thinking is going to be brand new and maybe a little more difficult, I might give a hint for each lock, right? For the classes that I know they're really going to be able to take it and run with it and maybe fly through the game, I won't give them any hint cards. So that's totally up to you. It's just to know your kids, how much you anticipate them struggling, and then you can decide how many hint cards to hand out based on that. The other thing that's awesome about hint cards is that it actually encourages kids to persevere and avoid asking for help for as long as possible. They really, really, really hate giving up these hint cards. So they will work as hard as they can to that point of productive struggle. We obviously don't want steam coming out of their ears to where they're so frustrated they want to shut down, because that's obviously going to defeat the purpose of the game. We want them to get through the locks so they can practice the economic concept. But sometimes it's that puzzle thinking, that out of the box thinking, that gets them hung up. And that's where those hint cards are going to help you out, to where you can kind of guide them through the puzzle part so they can really get into the economic part of the game. And again, you'll see that when you get into the supply and demand breakout that I'm going to show you. So hint cards, highly recommend. And all I do is open up a Word document, type hint card a few times, and then print it out and cut it apart. So super simple to make. And the bright color just allows me to really quickly spot groups that might need my help, which is why I suggest the colorful paper. All right, the benchmarks that the game I'm going to show you addresses would be at the high school level and supply and demand. But again, this game is customizable. So there are bits and pieces that you can change up just a bit to make it work for the middle school standards. Or you could change it up a bit to fit different level classes. And again, I'm going to show you that. It's when we get to some of the multiple choice question portions, you can replace what I have with stuff that you've created. So you can definitely manipulate this a bit. And I wanted to discuss some of the issues, but also anxieties that I had when I was first running these games in my classroom. My biggest fear was technology breaking, because even on the best of days, it seems like something always goes wrong. The internet goes out, somebody's Chromebook dies, maybe somebody accidentally clicks off the website. If you get booted out of the game, unfortunately, you can't get right back in and pick up where you left off. You have to re-enter all the combinations that you've already done. So I do encourage students to discreetly record the combinations that they've solved, just in case something happens and they need to go back to the page and have to start from scratch. The other thing that's a big issue is cheating. And it's a big problem if you're going to be running this game, for multiple classes. I always tell teachers to avoid offering incentives to kids to finish as quickly as possible. You don't want them to be racing against each other. You want them to be more intrinsically motivated to just enjoy the process. Instead of having a boring worksheet, hey, we get to play this fun game. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to give extra credit to the first two teams that complete the game or get through all the locks. Otherwise, you're creating that incentive for kids to cheat, for the kids in your first block to give the combinations to the kids that you have later in the day. So if you avoid giving out prizes and extra credits, etc., you're going to help alleviate a huge chunk of that potential cheating. The other thing that I'm going to show you in just a bit is that you could require your students to fill out a student handout that goes with the game, where they're proving they understand why the lock combinations are what they are. So they can't just copy down the codes that an earlier student wrote down for them. They have to actually explain why the answers are what they are. The other problem that was more of an issue before COVID, I think a lot of schools, most schools became one-to-one after COVID. But when I first started running these games, we barely had one functioning computer cart to share in our entire building. And it was really, really difficult, nearly impossible to book the computer lab. So I really quickly realized that these games work very well on cell phones. If that's something that your school permits you to do, is allow students to use cell phones in the classroom for educational purposes. Doesn't matter if it's an Android, an iPhone, these games work great. And kids are used to hovering over small screens. They're all in them all day. And they can definitely expand on the different clues and hints and be able to see what they need to be able to play the games on their phones if that's necessary. One of the biggest issues that I had when I first started running these games was that kids will finish the game at different timing. I had some kids that just loved this type of problem solving activity, and they would fly through the game and they loved it. But then they'd be sitting there kind of twiddling their thumbs, whereas other kids might be stuck on the first lock, getting really frustrated and just taking a lot longer than some of the other groups. And it didn't matter if it was an all CP class or an all honors class. I had kids finishing up at different paces all the time. So instead of that being a problem, like if anybody gets walkthroughs from your administrators, we used to get walkthroughs all the time. And so whenever I would run these games, I would be so paranoid that they were going to walk in after half the groups had finished and half are still working. And I'm in this limbo of what do I have them do once they're done? You can use that to your advantage. You are one teacher in a classroom full of students. Those kids that finish early, your high flyers, so to speak, get them to become your teacher assistants. They can be circulating the room when other groups hold up that hint card. Train them, get them used to helping out, jumping in, visiting the different groups, and not giving away answers, but gently nudging them in the correct direction. So that can really become a strength, the fact that groups are finishing up at different times, especially because it's really difficult when kids are in the game and you've got 5 different groups that need your help. Those kids that finish up early can really, really become an advantage to help you out. The other thing that you can do, if you want to turn this into a more formative assessment, the game could be practiced, and you could have some kind of assignment or reflection questions that students are required to complete independently once the game is done to demonstrate mastery of whatever concepts the game covered. And then the one I'm going to show you, obviously, supply and demand. So that's something else that you can do. And then kids that might take a little bit longer to finish up could finish those questions for homework or another time. So that can help level the playing field when you have different groups finishing up at different times. All right. As far as scaffolding the game so that you can reach a wider student audience, there's a few tips and tricks. Some of them you do before you play the game, and some of them you do while you're playing the game. The first one is something called doodle notes. I did not create doodle notes. It was a colleague of mine in University of Delaware's MA EEE program. Just curious if anybody is currently in that program, gone through that program, thinking about going through the program. With the University of Delaware, if you pop that in the chat, go Blue Hens. Just curious, anybody? Maybe I'm the only one, but it is a great program. And part of it, you have to complete what's called an implementation project. So something that you create that you can share with other teachers. And Amy Hyatt is her name. She created these doodle notes. And if you're currently using any kind of graphic organizer for your students, maybe they complete it while you're lecturing, or maybe it's something they complete while they're reading or watching a video. Doodle notes are just like a graphic organizer, but with some serious upgrades. They're really appealing for your visual learners or for kids who just need to be doing something while they're listening to help center them and help ground them and help them focus. Kids are literally doodling, but they're doodling on the topic. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. All right. Again, you're going to get all these links, so there's no need to switch over to the Nearpod to open this up. I'm going to give you one document that has all the links in order of appearance in tonight's presentation. But Amy created an entire series of doodle notes that kids can complete before they play the game. And one of the ways that you can scaffold is to allow students to, or require students to have these doodle notes out in front of them so that they have this visual cue, this trigger for their memory when they're actually going through the game and need to recall this knowledge. And there's a few different ways that you can do this. I know Amy uses a document camera, and as she's lecturing, she's actually filling out the doodle notes with the kids. And they're doing their own version of the doodle notes as they see fit, whatever's going to help them. So the demand and supply ones are at the beginning here. Equilibrium, elasticity, price controls. Those are all going to be things that are covered in the game that I'm going to show you. So kids could literally have these all laid out and use them as an assist while they're playing. And the very end, she has these completed so that you can see what they actually look like when they're all done, right? And there are a ton, not just in supply and demand, but all kinds of economic concepts. And a lot of them match up to the other digital escape rooms that I'm going to show you on other topics. So if this is something that you find works well for your kids, you can come back to this collection of doodle notes and you'll probably find some that work for that particular game. So that's been a huge help, at least for my kids. And Amy did give me permission to share, so she's amazing. The other thing that I would say is to have that student handout printed out. I mentioned it earlier as a method to avoid cheating, where kids have to fill out this handout to prove they understand why the answers are what they are. But there's two different versions of this student handout. One is scaffolded, one is not. So I'm going to show you the scaffolded one. All right, this one has some of those step-by-step instructions that if you just give them the game URL, it's not necessarily going to have. There's a trade-off involved. It's going to take out some of that puzzle solving piece because typically you want kids to go in and use that critical thinking and problem solving to figure out what they're supposed to do. This kind of takes that down a notch. It does give them a bit more hints, a bit more guidance, but it's still a fun, challenging experience. Just a strategy for level the playing field for our kids that might struggle with this type of activity. So it has tips and tricks and hints and lots more visual cues than the other handout that I'm going to show you. It also has a spot for them to enter the lock combination so that they've got it right in front of them. They can actually see the puzzles that are on the game screen are on the paper as well. So it helps keep them organized. And it's not so much trying to sift through paper, stare at the screen and go back and forth. Everything's in this one spot. And then they can actually go to the computer and enter the locks as they solve them. So it's a little bit more user-friendly. The other handout looks like this. This is the non-scaffolded one. So for example, the first lock that you're going to experience in a little bit when you open up the game gives kids different situations where they have to figure out what happens to demand, what happens to price and quantity when different things happen in the market. This is going to make kids prove that they understand it by drawing the graph that goes with that scenario and actually showing you what the shift looks like. So that's just an example of where you're requiring students to show that they understand why the answers are what they are. So this one doesn't have any hints built in, but it's basically proved to me that you get it and how you arrived at the answer. So that's the non-scaffolded version of the student handout. Okay, the other thing that I want to show you, let me skip forward here. Okay, I've got the handouts. Okay, there's two different versions of the game. And when you're in your breakout rooms, you can decide which version of the game you'd like to try. One of the games is scaffolded, one is not. But the difference between the two games is very subtle. So if you have mixed abilities in one classroom, you can very easily assign the different version of the game to different students, and they will have no idea that they're looking at different screens. It's that similar. So one of them doesn't have the hints and extra visual cues built in, the other one does, but it's the exact same concepts that you're covering. It's the exact same mission, the exact same challenges, just without the extra hints and tips and visuals built in. And the only difference in the URL is the number 2. And if you're using a learning management system like Schoology, I know Schoology allows you to assign different things to different kids. And again, they'll have no idea that somebody else isn't playing the same game or that they didn't get the exact same assignment. It's very, very subtle. And again, you'll get to see that when you're in the breakout rooms, which we're going to head into in just a minute. I want to give you some instructions here. So we're going to put you in breakout rooms of groups of 4 or 5. Again, it is very helpful if you, when you're in the breakout rooms, turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves. I am going to put the link to the games in the chat, and you'll open up the game. One of you in the group will open up the game and share your screen. That way, everybody's looking at the same thing at the same time, and you can decide who wants to do that. Maybe whoever is most tech savvy opens up the game link, shares their screen, and then you guys can talk your way through the first couple locks, however many locks you can get through in about 15 minutes. All right, and I will say, if you're one of the folks who, or if you're a group that just really is good at this type of thinking, maybe you're experienced with escape rooms and you fly through the first couple locks, when you get to locks 4 and 5, and actually I'm going to put these instructions up on my screen. This is what I'm going to be putting in the chat. If you get to locks 4 and 5 in that amount of time, there are other questions that you need. And normally in the classroom, when we debrief, I'll explain to you, it gets really interactive and kind of crazy and goofy. In the breakout rooms, you won't necessarily get to do that, but there are questions that you need for those locks. And they are all housed in this one spot. So you'll open up this tinyurl.com/great escape links. The game link is under number 6. And if you make it to locks 4 and 5, the questions that you need are on that document as well. They're provided in number 8 and number 9. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, this is the link that you're going to be opening up. Game 6 is where you'll find the actual game link. If you are really fast, the questions that go with locks 4 and 5 are right here. All right, so 15 minutes, try out the supply and demand game. You're going to experience exactly what your students experience. But of course, most of us aren't virtual. And are there any questions though, before about the process, about the game? Any questions before we put you into breakout rooms? Check the chat.
Now is when you should unmute. Feel free to speak up and ask Amy if there's any questions. And I cannot emphasize enough, please, if your cameras are off, they need to be on, especially during the breakout rooms. Amy, did you want like 5 or 6 people per room?
I think that's good. Yeah, with the
Okay.
amount of people we have on here, that'll be good. And if you run into any issues, I believe there's an option where you can flag for help, and I can jump into a breakout room if you're really stuck and need me. And again, I'm going to put these instructions in the chat once everybody's in the escape room so that you'll have that process right in front of you as well. Okay,
Okay, should we send them off?
let's do it. Good luck.
Okay, here they go.
All right, and once everybody's in, that's when I'll put the instructions in the chat. That way everybody can see it. All right, welcome back, everybody. Waiting on a few more just to come back to the main room.
I'm going to remind everyone to turn on cameras.
It looks like just a few more.
Okay,
back.
bye.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again.
All the products that are going viral on TikTok. And then
Email.
Right. Looks like we might be waiting on a few more to come back. All right. Those of you that are back, if you're comfortable with toggling over to Nearpod, I'm curious how it went. I have to apologize. apparently the link that I sent in the chat pretty much immediately disappeared. So that frustration aside, because you won't be doing that, you won't make that mistake in your classroom. I'm curious how it was for your first time. Okay, so definitely some stressful, couldn't get it to work, fun. Yeah, going link to another link. Yeah, I agree. You know, when you're dealing with a Zoom situation, it's not always the most user-friendly. But in your classroom, it's not going to be like that. The only link that they'll have open will be the game link. And the questions you'll probably have printed on paper. I know a lot of you actually made it to the 4th and the 5th lock, which is where you have to go back to that central document with all the links. Again, if you're running this in a physical classroom, you're not going to run into that issue. But other than that, it was really fun and challenging. You like the interactive back and forth using the graphs. That's great, Rachel. All right, let's see. Took a while to get started. Yeah, these are some of these funky Zoom issues that you're going to run into that hopefully won't be an issue in the classroom. All right, only got to the 2nd lock. All right, so you can see when it's your first time experiencing the game, it's probably a good idea to go through that first lock together, because that frustration that you may have felt doing this for the first time, it might be what your students experience too. And we don't want to lose the benefits of the game because figuring out how to get started gets them stuck. And that's where the scaffolding tricks and the modeling tricks are really going to help to alleviate some of the issues that you might have experienced going through this for the first time. All right, those technical issues, again, when you're running it in the classroom, won't be as much of an issue. And I did want to show you the game is very strategic as far as the order of the locks and how they're actually designed. So let me come back here. All right, this is the game that you all had open, and you can see it's a Halloween themed game. When I'm teaching economics in the fall, it usually lines up really well as far as timing. When I teach semester classes, we get to spring semester, it's a little funky doing the Halloween piece, but I just tell the kids to use their imagination. And the villain is always Dr. Scarcey. And she's always a very disgruntled economics teacher who's trying to seek out revenge on her students. And in this case, she's trying to lock away Halloween, all right, and cancel it. So they have to solve all the locks to save the spirit of Halloween. All right,
Hey, Amy,
yeah,
can I chime in for a second? I think
absolutely.
that's a great word to use, but maybe I'm being overreacting. But given the recent shootings and people being shot at schools, if we use the word disgruntled and taking it out on the students, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm not. Maybe I'm being overly like sensitive, but I'm wondering, like, if Dr. Scarcely could just be like, gives everyone a potion and they have to unlock it. So I'm not criticizing you saying it. I'm saying is, should we be careful? Maybe some students might accidentally triggered by. I didn't mean to call you out, and I should have put that in chat.
It's absolutely a great question. And I'm glad that you're thinking that way. And absolutely, as these horrible things happen, we're going to have to make adjustments with the way that we present things to our students, because we don't want to make them feel uncomfortable and we don't want students to be triggered. Absolutely. I am going to show you how to create these games using Google Forms. So even if you don't want to have to pay for access to Breakout EDU, but maybe you want to run this game, but make some of those tweaks to make sure that all of your students are comfortable, which I think is a really good point to raise. You could just change up that the mission statement just a little bit and make it a little more comfortable. You can absolutely do that. And I appreciate you bringing that up. So the mission can absolutely be changed up. And when you get to the first lock, the point of this particular lock is to get students used to moving curves left and right, not up and down. Because we know when we're shifting the supply and demand curves, if they shift the demand curve up for increasing and down down for decreasing, it's okay. But when you get to supply, if you move the supply curve up and down to increase and decrease, you're actually going to be moving the curve in the wrong direction. So we want our kids to get used to saying left and right when they're shifting curves. Price and quantity, certainly up and down, but not the curves. So that's the whole point of this first lock. And I'm just going to quickly put in the code here so that I can show you the strategy behind some of the other locks. And for example, here, Halloween is near and trick-or-treaters will soon start to show which direction will the demand curve go. So we know that for candy, the demand is going to increase around Halloween. The number of buyers is going to increase. So the curve would shift to the right. All right. And then if candy makes folks dandy, what happens to the price? It's going to increase. And the hope is that students are going to pick up on that in the lock setup. It gives them this hint that curves shift left and right, price and quantity go up and down. And they'll have to notice that before they start going through the scenarios and trying to enter the locks, or they might get it a little bit mixed up. All right, so let me put in the rest of the answers here so I can show you the other locks. Okay, for the second one, it's really getting into the visual behind the shifts. And instead of centering on demand, it's going to focus on supply. So for this particular lock, students are given several news headlines and they have to figure out which way supply would actually shift. And again, this is where the left and right versus up and down is going to come in handy. And it tells them to start at curve 1 in the visual. This is one of those things that can trip students up, is where do I start? How many curves do I jump? Do I go back to curve 1 for each scenario, or do I pick up where I left off? In the scaffolded version of the game, those instructions and those details are going to be there. In the non-scaffolded version of the game, students have to pick up on that in the clue. And if they don't, they'll get the combination wrong. So that's one of those subtle differences between the scaffolded and non-scaffolded and some of those extra hints that are built in. Right, so for the first news headline, it tells them brand new candy factories open across the US. For starting at curve S1, that's going to be an increase in supply. So they're going to jump to curve 4, and 4 would be the first number in this lock. All right, so again, they'll go through each scenario and jump one curve at a time. What tends to trip students up is that numbers are used more than once.
I can do that.
In the scaffolded version of the game, that is another situation where kids are provided that extra hint that you can use numbers more than once. And once you go through all the scenarios, this ends up being the lock combination. Now for the third lock, it takes it up a notch and it puts both curves on the graph. And they're having to figure out which way the demand curve shifts and what the new equilibrium price and quantity are. Something that I figured out through trial and error, if you have students that are colorblind, you definitely want to make sure that they're partnered up with kids who are not, because when you get to the color locks, that's going to create problems for them. And you don't want to put them on the spot or have them have to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm colorblind, I can't figure this out. That's why, another reason why you want kids working in pairs versus working solo. It kind of alleviate that issue. So for this one, it says, let's hope you know how to graph changes in demand in the market for candy corn. Use the attached visual. Now for this one, it says they should always start back at curve D1. So they're starting here, this initial equilibrium, and the first scenario tells them a zombie apocalypse has wiped out 50% of our population. Instead of eating candy corn, zombies are eating human flesh. So of course, demand for candy corn is going to decrease, and they would jump to this equilibrium. And it asks them to identify the new equilibrium price and quantity, and kids will notice it's a color lock, and price and quantity have different colors on the axes. So for the new equilibrium price, it's going to be the purple one. And for the new equilibrium quantity, it's going to be red. So the first two colors in this lock are purple and red. And of course, the second scenario is going to end up with an increase in supply. And remember, they're always starting back at D1. Recent studies show that people who eat candy corn live longer. You're going to see an increase in the number of buyers, and you would jump to the right. And so the last two colors for the new equilibrium price and quantity would be green and blue. And they'll enter that in, and it'll take them to the next lock. Now, for this particular lock, your kids are going to be coming up to you. If you didn't make it to lock 4, obviously you haven't seen this, But in the lock setup, it tells kids that they have to get a set of questions from the teacher. And this is where I know some of you may have felt frustration having to jump from one link to the other. I highly recommend that you have these questions printed instead of delivering them to your student through a link. It is frustrating to try to have the game open, but also try to look at another set of questions. Have it printed so that they're not feeling that frustration. And they have to come up to you and they have to tell you a joke that makes you laugh. And if they make you laugh, you give them the questions. The reason this is built into the game is so that you know exactly when each group has made it halfway through the game. All right, so this is a cue. And what I do at this point, for the groups that haven't approached me yet with a terrible joke, I'll look to see if they've used their hint card. If they haven't used their hint card, I'm going to walk over and I'm going to see where they're stuck. And I'm going to encourage them to use that, or I'm going to gently nudge them in the correct direction to get them unstuck. So it's a way for you to know where everybody is, how all the groups are progressing. And the questions, this is one of these places where you can customize the game. So the questions that go with this lock center on elasticity, and they are high level questions. They don't work for all of my classes. So you can actually swap out the questions with your own set. You just have to make sure that the correct answers are in the same spot. So I'm actually going to show you this. All right, this is the teacher key that's also on that group of links that you were sent. The teacher key has all the questions here, and it shows you where all the answers are. So if you want to make this work for the middle school level, definitely swap out the questions. If you want to make this work for an advanced placement or maybe an inclusion classroom setting, you might have to change up the questions. Again, just make sure that your answers are in the same spot that mine are in. That way, I'm going to come back to the game. Okay, it tells them the answers to the questions have to be added to the end of this URL. And that's going to take them to a riddle. All right, and I am going to show you the riddle, see if you guys can figure it out for those of you that didn't get there yet. Okay, the riddle looks like this, and actually the answer is right there, so that didn't work out. But it says the answer to unlock the riddle, or excuse me, the answer to the riddle will unlock the next step. I'm tall when I'm young, I'm short when I'm old, and every Halloween I stand up inside jack-o'-lanterns. And the answer, of course, is candle. And that's the combination for that particular lock. So let me come back. Now the next one, the next lock is one of my favorites. The first group that gets to this particular lock, this is when the classroom just kind of gets fun because all the other kids wonder what in the world they are doing. So for this particular lock, there's a set of questions that students need, but to get the questions, they have to pull up Michael Jackson's Thriller on YouTube, and they have to actually figure out how to do the Thriller dance while the music is blaring on whatever device they're using. And it tells them to skip to 10:15. If you've ever watched the music video, it's a really long one. So they skip to 10:15 in the video, and they actually stand up and start doing the Thriller dance. Word of caution. One of the first times I ran this game, I had people from a local university, University of Delaware, come and visit my classroom to see how this type of activity went. And when you get to this point in the game and all the other groups are getting here and they're all blaring Thriller and they're all standing up and dancing, it can get really loud. And on that particular day, in that particular class, my school had a lockdown drill and I didn't hear it. So it was incredibly awkward. The administrator is compounding on my door and they're like, what is happening? You're supposed to be in lockdown. And meanwhile, we're just dancing to Thriller. We had no idea. So especially in today's environment, it's not a bad idea to check with your admin to see if that's something that they're planning so that you don't miss it. Because again, it can get loud and chaotic, but in a good way. So this is another situation where you know exactly where kids are, if they've made it to the step or not. They're on the very last econ related lock of the game. And this set of questions deals with price controls. It's another spot where you can customize the game. You can change the level of the questions. You could take them out completely and put something else that relates to supply and demand. I know the middle school content standards don't necessarily address elasticity and price controls, especially not at the same level as high school standards. So that's where you can swap those questions out Again, as long as you make sure that your answers are in the same spot as mine. And on that teacher key, again, you have the questions and it shows you exactly where the questions are. So once students figure out the answers to the questions, that becomes the lock combination. Now, the very last lock is a silly lock. I always throw some kind of silly lock into the mix as a brain break, but also just to kind of end on a fun note. So let me actually put in the answers to this so we can get to that. Okay, it is, whoops, come back here. ABC. The last lock is a rebus. And if you've never seen a rebus, it's a combination of words and letters that you have to decode and figure out what it says. And in the lock setup, it tells kids, solve the rebus to figure out Dr. Scarcity's favorite candy. A rebus is a puzzle in which words are represented by combinations of pictures and individual letters. And it says, hint, this isn't a letter lock, but you should think alphabetically. So I would love to see if you guys can figure out what Dr. Scarcity's favorite candy is. Thinking alphabetically, once you've figured that out, what do you think the combination actually is? It's 5 colors that you have to put in the correct order. I'll give you a minute to do that. And you don't have to click on the link on the Nearpod. You can just look at the Zoom screen to see the lock. See if you can figure this out. Okay, you guys figured out. Yes, you guys figured out it is Skittles. What's the order of the colors, though, of the color lock? Oh, okay. Rachel Neff, you got it. All right, you put the, yep, you guys got it. You put the colors in alphabetical order. So it's going to go green, orange, where did it go? Green, orange, purple, red, yellow. Green, orange, purple, red, yellow. All right, and then they'll get that congratulatory message. Now, if you end up deciding to make these games on your own, you can customize the message that students get. When I no longer drink coffee, but I used to drink a lot of coffee every day, and my last screen was told kids to go make me a cup of coffee on my Keurig. The first group to get through the entire game and brew me a cup of coffee and hand deliver it to me was the winning group. No prize, again, because I don't want to incentivize cheating, but just for the fun of winning. So that is the general gist of how these escape rooms actually work. I am going to hop back over to the Nearpod, and I am curious if anybody has any questions on anything that I can address so far. Before I show you some resources, I'm going to show you some other games that have been created, and I'm going to show you again resources if you're interested in creating these games on your own. Awesome. Glad you enjoyed it, Nelson. All right. And again, at any point, you can unmute or you can pop questions in the chat. So I'm going to skip forward here. The second one, the second game that's scaffolded, you have that link on that list of the Great Escape Workshop links. And I'll put that in the chat again before we close out so that you have access to that. Okay, this is a Google Drive folder that is filled with other games that I've created. And they are on a variety of economics topics, but also personal finance. So for example, the Credit Crunch game covers how to navigate a credit card statement and how compound interest is actually calculated. I also have Credit Max Credit, which I'm going to be adding to this folder in the next day or two. And that goes through the basics of how a credit score is actually calculated and what's on your credit report, and how to actually build solid credit and maintain a solid credit score. So that's another personal finance game that I'm going to be adding to this folder. But I've got externalities, marginal analysis, unemployment, market welfare, production possibilities. And as they're scaffolded, I'm adding those extra resources back into these folders. When they were initially created, scaffolded versions weren't included, but that's something that I'm going back and trying to add as I go. So for example, the production possibilities game has a student handout that helps to scaffold the activities. And anything that you need is in the folder. So every single game has a teacher key. Every single game has all the corresponding materials. Some of them don't need any extras. The supply and demand game is one where you'd have to print out the questions ahead of time. But some of them, all you need is the URL to take it and run with it. Everything is housed on the actual website. So you can click through if that's something that you're interested in. You can take a look. And my email is always at the top of the teacher key. I love when people reach out. If you have any questions or any ideas or want to collaborate on a game, I am always open to that. So feel free to contact me anytime you need. Other resources that I want to show you. If you want to create breakouts, but you don't want to spring for the Breakout EDU platform, you can certainly do this on Google Forms. And I'm going to show you the game that you just played. I created it on Google Forms as well, just to show you what this would look like. So it's got that mission, which again, I'm so thankful that you brought up the point of maybe the wording isn't as what we would want it to be in today's climate, especially after recent school shootings. This is where you could change that. I typically create my locks in PowerPoint. This is all created in PowerPoint. And then I use the snipping tool and save it as an image. And I just upload it onto Google Forms. So it's really simple, straightforward. University of YouTube is what I use to figure out how to navigate Google Forms. It's really easy if you've never done it before. And each lock has clues on the little file folder. So it has the exact same elements that you see on Breakout EDU, but it's free. The only thing that I caution you, I'm going to show you, I'm going to put in my name, I'm going to go to the first lock here. The only thing is that our tech savvy students know how to figure out the lock combinations without actually playing. And this is where that student handout is going to come in handy. So what they can do to figure out the lock combinations is type anything in, and they're going to see a message that says, oops, try again. Our tech savvy kids know that they can right click and they can view the source code. Let me see if I can actually make this work. Okay. View page source. Here it is. And once this is up, they can do Control F and look for that message. Anywhere the message is, they can see the correct code next to it. Okay, so remember the directional lock on Breakout EDU, where it was right, up, left. On Google Forms, they have to enter in capital letters, the first letter of the direction. They can find the answers. And they can just keep searching for this throughout this source code and get all the combinations. So if you're going to make breakouts in Google Forms, you just have to be aware of that. And make sure that you really have a setup in your classroom where kids don't want to cheat. Just they need to enjoy the activity or have to prove that they understand what they know. Otherwise, it is very easy for them to quickly figure out all the codes and cheat. So that's just a word of caution on that. All right, the other thing is there's a collection of digital resources that I absolutely love. I didn't create this document, so I can't add or delete anything. And there are a few links that don't work, but most of them are functioning. And it's just this fantastic place for a ton of digital resources that you can use if you want to make your own games. It's where I found every single resource that I've used has come from this list. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. Before I do, there is a virtual workshop on Econ EdLink. If you wanted to make a physical escape room for your classroom, this is a really good, quick professional development that you could listen to and get some tips and tricks for that. I don't typically do the physical escape rooms because I teach the same class a lot and it's a huge setup and breakdown between classes. I just haven't found it feasible. But if you are interested in that, this is a fantastic PD on that. All right, so let me skip forward to the digital resources. It looks like this. All right, this is also on that Google Doc of all the links that this is on there, but they have so many different ideas and I'm going to show you some of my favorites, but there's a ton that you can sift through. And when I go to create these games, I use the same villain over and over. So Dr. Scarcity is always the villain in my econ themed games. And then I have a different villain for my personal finance games, but they're always up to no good. They're always doing something terrible. And the reason that I stick with the same mission or theme, it's less that I have to come up with anytime I want to make a new game. And it just makes the process a little bit easier. Then I'll choose which economic concept or concepts plural that I want to cover. I think about what I want the kids to be able to do or know or understand. And that becomes the basis for the locks, the individual locks. For example, supply and demand. I had one on supply. I had one on demand. I had one on graphing, elasticity, price controls. So you can kind of figure out how many locks you need in the game based on how many concepts or skills you're trying to assess or help them review. All right. And then I always throw in, I've already told you, I always throw in a silly lock, either in the middle of the game or at the end of the game as a nice brain break for them, something fun. And once I have the ideas for the amount of locks and what concepts I want them to cover, I'll sift through those digital resources, and I usually get inspired for different challenges based on what would work with the skill I'm trying to review. And then I already told you, I'll put everything in PowerPoint, I save it as an image, and then you can upload it either to Breakout EDU or to Google Forms. The first game, if this is something that you want to try out, the first game is very time consuming. But after that, the ideas just seem to flow, and it becomes much less difficult, much less time consuming to actually put these games together. So some of my favorite digital resources, I love, there's one where you can create fake receipts. This one is really cool. So this is from my market welfare game, and kids are practicing calculating areas of producer surplus and consumer surplus. Right? This is something that I use specifically for my AP classes, where this is a skill that they have to have for that exam. And on the receipts, it gives them the items that Dr. Scarcity purchased and the prices, and they have to figure out the colors on the receipts match up to the spots on the graph and calculate these areas from there. So that's an example of how you could use fake receipts. And the website looks like this. So you would just enter in a fake store name, a slogan, the address. You can customize this to be something silly that relates to your school or maybe your class, right? In the items and the amounts, you can even change the font on the receipt. And then you just save it as an image. It'll generate the receipt, save it as an image, and upload it to your lock clue. So that's a fun one. I really enjoy the fake newspaper clippings. This is from my production possibilities game. And it gives them different scenarios that would shift a country's production possibilities curve. So it tells kids to start on the red curve, which is right here. And then they have to read the newspaper headlines and figure out what order they actually jump in. And if I'm going to zoom in here, hopefully it shows up on your screen too. There's dates on the newspapers, and the way that they have to enter these in is in chronological order. So that is kind of cool. The resource looks like this, where again, you enter in your story, your date, the title of the newspaper, the title of the article, and you can type as much or as little as you want, and then it generates actual clipping. So that's pretty fun. You can do a lot with that particular tool. Let me come back to the Nearpod. I love the fake text messages, is always a hit. My personal finance games, the main character is always texting his mother. And so there's lots of clues embedded within the text message. This is from my unemployment game, and I'm realizing I'm quickly running out of time. So I'm going to skip forward to the last couple. And this is what it looks like. All of these are on that list of digital resources that you have. You have rebus generators, which you've already seen this with the Skittles clue. This is really fun. This is from my credit crunch game where kids, oh no, this is from unemployment. Kids have to solve each rebus and then figure out what type of unemployment is represented for each. And this is what it looks like. You pop in your phrase and then it'll create a rebus for you. Now you can choose to keep the word hints or not. I highly recommend keeping the word hints, because if you cover up the word, your kids are not going to know that that's supposed to be a bus and that's supposed to be a store. So I always leave the word hints on there because I'm not evil. Moving right along here, fake news headlines. These are great. This one was for a marginal analysis game. This is what I envision when I think of Dr. Scarcity. I'm probably violating copyright here, but I always think of Bette Midler in Hocus Pocus. So she is my Dr. Scarcity, and she shows up in all my econ games. And there's hints hidden in the actual news headline that kids need to be able to work through these questions. And that's what it looks like. Last but not least, there's a jigsaw puzzle generator. So you can put like actual problems that they have to solve. This was one of those brain break locks where when the kids put the puzzle together, it revealed this, which just translates to econ rocks. And that was the code for the lock. That was one of the silly ones that I did. website looks like this. This is an ad to not drive under the influence of marijuana. I don't know why this keeps popping up. I apologize. And then actually there's one more, there's snotes. So if you've never seen a snote, there's a video tutorial here, and this is from my game on externalities, but basically what it is you click on the image and you twist it. And as you twist it, different words pop out to you. So this one says neighbor's barking dog. If your students are colorblind, this is not going to work for them. And we're not going to be able to distinguish between the red and the green, etc. So that's why you definitely want to have them working in pairs, so they're not having to be put on the spot and called out in front of everybody. But basically in this game, kids have to figure out what type of externality is in each of these notes. And this video tutorial shows kids how to actually navigate these. So those are just some of my favorites, but there are a ton that you can work through. And again, if you decide you want to try any of these games in your own classroom, or if you want to try to make your own, I'm always happy to help. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. My last name is crazy though. There's a lot of extra letters that I still don't understand. My maiden name was 1 syllable and 4 letters. And then I married somebody who's Polish and it turned into Krzyzanowski. So just make sure you remember that first Z, or the email's not going to get to me. And we have just a couple minutes left. That is all I have for you. If there's any questions or anything that I'd be happy to answer, any issues that you can think of that you might run into.